Hello everyone, my name is Joanne Lockwood and I'm your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation about the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SEE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 54 with the title, Everyone Should Feel as though they belong, are welcome and valued. And today I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Essie Hardy. Essie describes herself as a trainer, consultant, event speaker, and advocate for disability inclusion in the workplace. When I asked Essie to describe her superpower, she said, the ability to make intangible ideas around disability inclusion tangible. Hello, Essie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I mean, we've had a good chat in the green room beforehand, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
So, Essie, tell me, everyone should feel as though they belong, are welcomed and valued. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think that there is kind of this status quo and quote norm about what being welcome and valued should be. I always say to people that you can't make anybody feel included. Inclusion is a feeling that comes from beneath. Inclusion is a feeling that comes from within. So if we don't feel included, it's because what society or what that business or what that organization is doing to not help us to be included. So businesses should be doing their utmost to create an environment that is open to everybody. So that if people walk in, they can immediately, for me, inclusion is taking a breath of fresh air. So walking into a room, or in my case, going in my wheelchair because I'm physically disabled, and not feeling as though I have to start mitigating all the barriers that I'm facing as soon as I enter that building, whether it is people's attitudes of not wanting to talk to me, whether it's getting near to the space in which I want to engage in a conversation, whether it's finding a way to make other people feel okay when I'm not going to have the buffet that's presented, or a multitude of other things, including if I need to go to the loo, is the loo situation, is the accessible toilet going to be in a place where I can get to it without much help, without making much of a big deal about it, about everybody else? And also, once I'm in that toilet, am I going to be able to manage? And that, all these things, I think they sound like they're separate things, but they're all part of a wider feeling of that inclusion and therefore belonging. Because let's say me, for example, if I walk in a room and I'm immediately thinking, I don't know how much I can drink because, I don't know if the loo is going to be accessible when I get there, therefore I'll drink less so I don't need to go. That prevents me from being able to engage in the conversation. If I walk into a room in my wheelchair and people go, oh, she's in a wheelchair, we won't talk to her because she obviously doesn't have anything to say, then I immediately am having to compensate for that by not just relaxing and being part of the conversation, but by always thinking, okay, how are everybody else going to interact with me and how can I make them feel comfortable? So I think that inclusion promotes and supports that sense of belonging, because when you feel relaxed in that environment, then you're going to feel as though you belong more, because you feel as though that environment and people that put that event together has thought about you, thought about your needs, and thought about how you're going to feel in that space.
So true. I've got a confession that you have educated me beyond belief, not through any training course, not through any proactive education, but just by allowing me to be by your side and travel with you, have meals with you, drink with you, go to parties, have Christmas with you once. Just by being with you, I learned so much that I had never appreciated before. And I learned about able-body privilege. We often describe privilege as something you don't have to think about. I never thought about walking. I never thought about my route from A to B without having to overthink it. And I suddenly realised we spent a day with you in London, getting on and off a bus, getting on the underground, walking up steps, going into buildings. And this was not an educational session. This was you just living your life and me being with you. Whereas I remember in the past, and I've been with people who had a disability or a disabled person with a disability, however we describe people these days, it was always in the moment. It was never in their life. And to feel and experience what your challenges on a daily basis in society, this, as you would always say, society disables you, not your physical side.
Yeah.
To understand that, I remember being on the bus and how the guy the bus driver almost tutted when he had to put the ramp down. It was almost like an inconvenience. That really, and I thought, wow, that's your lived experience on a daily basis. And the other thing I remember was being upstairs in Waterloo, at Waterloo Station. We had that drink and we were having and I remember, because you're fiercely independent, you don't want people to mother you or be around or overly look after you. I remember we're drinking away and I said, Joe, do you mind putting my shoe back on? And I thought, yeah, sure, I can put your shoe back on. And it's little things like that you just never appreciate, but unless you're around somebody and understand their needs. And I think you taught me about able-bodied privilege without educating me, if you like, just by being with you, by being your friend, if you like.
I'd also just like to clarify for your audience, I don't go to the pub and just take my shoes off to get comfortable. My shoe had fallen off. Can I just make that point? That I wasn't just like, I'm just stretched out in Waterloo Station and take my shoes off and then get Jane to put them back on when I need to go. You're absolutely right. Absolutely. And I think that what's interesting to me is that absolutely, that is one of my biggest areas of oppression. And we've talked about that mainly from a physical perspective, but you've talked about that in terms of attitudes as well. So the bus driver who sighs when he sees somebody that he actually doesn't, or she doesn't even have to move to do anything for, that she literally has a button next to her that she can press and the ramp drops down. I mean, it is that simple, but it's still, as far as they're concerned, it's a ball ache. And the attitudinal barriers are compounding the lack of access for the physical environment for disabled people on a daily basis. And I think it's really important that we don't forget those internalized biases that we as disabled people hold about ourselves as well. So the general public and society, they all have opinions about disability and what disability is, and therefore what disabled people can achieve. But we as disabled people, a lot of the time, because of the same reasons, because of the media, because of what we've been told going through school and everything, we have internalized biases and what we call internalized ableism. Oh, I won't do it like this because this will make me more disabled, but actually it will also make my life a lot easier. And so we let the general public off, and we forgive people for doing these things that actually are not acceptable. Forgive them for making us go in the side entrance of the door. Forgive the bus driver for driving off because they can't be bothered to lower the ramp, or find an excuse for it. Because for us, because we've internalized that bias ourselves, that it's our problem, that we find a way to kind of mitigate that feeling in our minds. But I think what's really important, and going back to your original question about the kind of that sense of belonging and inclusion, when let's say in this case, kind of an event business has created an event and has thought about the needs of disabled people, then it almost lifts that internalized bias away, because it's saying to the disabled person, you are valuable, you are equal, we have thought about you, and these are the ways we're looking forward to engaging and interacting with you in our venue as well. So I think from that point, that there's so much that we can do as disabled people and as non-disabled people to support everybody to feel as though they belong and that they're equal in that belonging as well.
I think it's also making sure you're engaged with people who have disability in order to test out your process, to test out your event, test out your venue, because a lot of things I'd never considered. I think you highlighted to me once that there's an assumption that you'll have a PA with you, and so that person will help you maneuver, help you push a button. But from my understanding, you have limited dexterity in your arms. You can't lift them above a certain height. So when the lift call button is for you above a certain point, you can't touch it. And you can't necessarily rotate your chair within the space either. And there's a whole lot of things. So there's almost this assumption that you either have to reverse in, or you have to be pushed in, or you have to be maneuvered. And so to understand, I now look at the world with a different lens, thinking, could Essie do that? And I'm thinking, no, Essie would struggle in this venue. Essie would struggle getting up that step. Essie would never be able to get to the toilet here without asking for help. And that's the demeaning thing. It's the needing to feel that you have to ask for help. You want to have that agency. You want to be able to, if you want to go to the loo, you want to go to the loo when you want to do, the same way I would just sneak off. I wouldn't have to ask for reinforcements.
Yeah, announce. You're absolutely right. I mean, an example of that. I was out with my friend the other night, and I needed to go to the loo, and I saw what I thought was the door to the accessible loo, and so I was waiting for somebody to the woman behind the counter to open the door for me. And I was like, where is she? And I looked over and she's waiting somewhere else where the loo actually was. So I was waiting at the wrong door. And where the accessible loo actually was behind a table where there were 8 people sitting. And it was literally at the table. And so all these people had to get up and move in order for me to go to the loo. So I was thinking, and then I couldn't lock the door in the loo because it was unlockable. And then I was thinking, these people are going to know how long I'm in this loo for. And actually, am I all right with that? And then when they come out, they're going to know, oh, she's finished now. She's been a while. I wonder if it's a poo and it'll smell in there. But actually, it just takes longer because of the access or the lack of thought of access that's inside the loo. And I think, when you said before, people assume that other people do things or they'll assume that it'll be okay that way. I think that people, when they're building these things without talking to disabled people, talking with people with lived experience, they're not thinking at all. They're thinking, we'll do that. That's a job done. Tick that box. We'll move on to something that we consider to be more important, like a great IT system or whatever it is for that company. But I think that sometimes the assumption that somebody else will do it for people is even going that one step too far. It's about, we know we have to do it legally, therefore we've done it, let's move on and do something else. And I think that's what happens in so many cases, that actually they don't think, and I don't think it's deliberate. I think that people, when they're designing, they just don't think these things through. Or, for example, an example would be of how they could have done it differently. In that pub, for example, is, oh, I know the accessible loo's there, so let's not put a table around that. In order for a disabled person to be able to access that loo, first of all, without having to ask people to move and slowing down their experience, but also so they can have some privacy. And it's about stopping to think about what is going to make an experience equal to the experience of a non-disabled person in this case. So how can I equitably think about the situation? How can I create processes that are fair in the situation in order for that experience to be equal for the person who's going to be experiencing it?
Yeah, it's also things like spacing of tables and adequate gaps between backs of chairs. And I remember
it's absolutely everything, Joe. It's what's the word? There's no end to the amount of things you can do to make things inclusive. And I've started thinking about kind of when people say to me, "Oh, we want to make it truly accessible." I said, "Well, there's no way that you can make something truly accessible because every disabled person is unique, and you can't make something truly inclusive because everybody's understanding or feeling of that word inclusion is slightly differently. And we are, I want to also point out that we are talking very specifically about physically disabled people and wheelchair users. But we also have to add on top of that people with sensory impairments, people with learning disabilities, people with mental health disabilities, and everybody with invisible disabilities as well. So actually, if you have to stand up for a long time period, for example, how is that going to affect your invisible fatigue? And therefore, how well are you going to be able to engage later on in the conversation that's going on? So it's thinking about all, and you're absolutely right. That's why it's so important to always engage people, and not just engage, but co-produce with people with lived experience. And so you're getting that experience to support you to understand what needs to happen to make it work for every single person.
Yeah, you're so right about the sensory challenges as well. I mean, I've got a friend who is blind. I've got a friend who is deaf, and my friend who's deaf, she has an assistance dog, and she has all these challenges where her dog isn't good enough because it's not a guide dog for the blind, it's a hearing dog for the deaf, an assistance dog. Her dog isn't good enough to be included into restaurants, and she has certificates and cards. She has troubles getting taxi rides for her assistance dog, getting into restaurants. She's turned away. But as soon as you have the guide dog jacket, it's kind of like, yeah, wherever you like. But an assistant dog for someone who's deaf is like, well, second class, and she's often frustrated. And just travelling around London with her for a day, understanding how you can't take a dog on an escalator, how you then have to find the lift or stairs, the challenges she has when she gets on a train with the passenger assistance person, and they're asking someone to move out of the accessible seat, and the tuts and, oh, you don't look very disabled, why do you need to sit here, sort of thing. Oh, and my friend Joe is sitting next to me, by the way. So I feel guilty that I'm now sat with her having displaced somebody. There's a whole stigma around the disruption you caused just by wanting to be accepted, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, and it's your responsibility. And then that's a really good example, and that kind of it really, really highlights and goes back to the point I was making before about why disabled people have this internalized bias and internalized ableism. Because everywhere we go, everywhere we turn, every cornerstone of our life since we either acquired our disability or were born is all about, oh no, you're in the wrong, you're wrong, you need to change to be fixed, or you're causing a problem. And so no wonder we end up thinking, oh yeah, no, I am the problem, I'll just stay quiet.
Yeah, people huff. You're in my way, slow me down, I'm in a rush. Oh, and now you're here in front of me. That's all I need today, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, even it's there's it's those little things about, let's say we're trying to get to an event in London. So we start at Waterloo and we need to get over to, I don't know, for argument's sake, I don't know, Chelsea. Let's say it'll be a really good event in Chelsea, with really nice food and cakes. But maybe if we take you and I, Joe, it might take you. I don't know exactly which tube you need to get, but it might take you half an hour on the tube and maybe a 5-minute walk at the end. It would take me the same journey, let's say, up to an hour and a half. Because of the tube stations that are inaccessible, because of when I go to a train station, I have to wait at the barriers for somebody to let me through because I can't physically press the ticket machine to let myself through. So somebody needs to let me through, and yes, it might only take 10 seconds, but then that's lots and lots of 10 seconds. As a physically disabled person, and I'm imagining as a sensory impaired person, the general public are not watching out for a wheelchair user, and they're not necessarily watching out for a stick. So people walk and look eyeline, they don't look down. So the amount of times I have to stop and let somebody pass and move to the side, again, adds on the time. And so you've arrived at your venue, and maybe also, before I talk about the venue, maybe also there's some pavement works. And so there's literal bollard barriers up there that perhaps you can step onto the road and walk down, but they haven't thought about how to make that pass accessible. So I've been around 3 other roads, but still can't find a way down. So now I have to change my route again. And so then you arrive at the venue and you look really professional and really expert because you're 10 minutes early and you're all calm and gathered and everything ready to talk. I arrive at my venue half an hour late and flustered. And so then it impacts on how people perceive the two of us. Oh, Joe made it really, really easy, but Essie is a disabled person. Oh, it's so hard. And even if people, acknowledge that was nothing to do with me, they're still thinking, oh God, it's a pain in the arse getting a wheelchair user here. And this is all unconscious, but it's all still going on. And this prevents the opportunities for disabled people in careers, in education, in general engagement.
I mean, as I said earlier, I have able body privilege. I can walk, but I'm getting to the point. I'm in my late 50s now. I am not particularly fit. I've put on a few pounds. Well, I say a lot of pounds over COVID, over the lockdown.
Haven't
we? I recognise that I'm not as agile as I once was 10 years ago when I was at my tennis. And I was travelling to Newcastle the other week for a couple of nights, and so I had some luggage with me, not only my suitcase, but also a laptop and a few other bits and pieces of my handbag and things. And so I went from where I live into Victoria Station, and Victoria has lift access to all platforms, or it appears to have. And I was going to King's Cross, which is also fairly accessible from my experience there. But the route to go from A to B in Victoria was convoluted. There's a lot of levels, a lot of rabbit runs, and you're looking at signage, trying to think, where do I go next to get from? I'm going to go from that level to this level, then that lift to get me to that lift. Whereas if I just got up the steps or the escalator, I'd have gone straight up almost. But to get the accessible route with lifts took me 20 minutes, probably more, to follow that path. So I pretty and I thought, well, why should I struggle up the steps with my bag and hump it up and like I normally do, get to the top and go, oh, I'm exhausted now. I thought, this is a legitimate route. And I suddenly thought again, as I'm doing this, I thought, this is the route that people who have a disability who can't use the steps do all the time. And I had the choice to either lug or to take that route. You don't have the choice. You can only take one route. And it really brought it home to me again about the stations that don't have that access. Waterloo is not a particularly accessible station. If you can't use an escalator, even you have to about 4 sets of stairs before you can get to the escalator, can't you, in Waterloo?
I think there's a lift in Waterloo, but it's hidden behind the escalator. So you don't know where the lift is. I mean, this is another thing. There's no clear signage as well. So it's not easy to go to a station you haven't been to before and know where you're going. But I think you've made a really, really good point there, that actually being accessible and inclusive for disabled people doesn't just support disabled people, it supports everyone. If there's a ramp instead of stairs, it's not like non-disabled people can't get inside, but it just means that disabled people can also get inside, and so on and so forth. And I am very aware that we're talking, and almost deliberately, we're talking, because I am physically disabled, we're talking about the physical disabilities, but I am not mitigating those barriers that are presented for people without physical impairments. Just specifically talking about physical impairments because that's my experience. But I know, for example, my friend Lorna, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning her name. She is physically disabled, but she also has dyslexia. So whilst I can look at a sign and think, okay, that's the train I need to get to. Okay, that's a sign for the lift. Okay, I know I need to do 3 lefts and then 1 right. Or even when I'm asking directions on the street, okay, that person's told me I turn left at the ING pub. Lord, it really it doesn't support Lorna because of her dyslexia. She cannot read a sign. And if somebody says turn left at the ING pub, she's like, well, what's the ING pub? And what does that look like? And how do I know when I've got there? Because she can't read those communication signs that perhaps somebody without dyslexia. So going through London with her really kind of opened my eyes again to the even more compounded barriers that an ableistic or a world that doesn't think about access for disabled people has created.
You said at the beginning that you can detect when people don't want to engage with you, or as it looks difficult, or making judgments about you. We shake hands as a kind of well, maybe before COVID we did, but people go to shake your hand, and that can make people kind of nervous as well, can't it? Because you don't shake hands in a traditional way.
Yeah. So I'm left-handed, and although none of my limbs work very well, they all work a little bit, and my left hand works better and the top half than anything else. So I kind of do this. It's almost like a fist when I present it to a person. It comes out as a fist. So quite often people do a fist bump. And then I've had recently, because I'm also a brown person, that somebody's like bumped me and gone, respect. I was like, and I actually said to that person, well, that's not actually respectful. I wasn't trying to do, the Jamaican respect. I was trying to shake your hand. And, I said it because I know that they didn't mean offense by it. But I think all these mixed messages, be it from that non-disabled person who didn't know what they were going to be greeted with, and I think was just trying to match me, it's really, really difficult for both sides to know how to get it right. And what I do is I usually say either, it's quite good and kind of restrictions that you don't have to shake people's hands anymore. There's, you don't have to touch. It's becoming less of a norm, which makes it more accessible for me. And it's like, do you like to have a hug? And I don't like to have a hug anyway, so I just say no. But if they do want to shake my hand, I have to take over and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, so it's successful. And then for, what happens is that impacts on our energy levels. So if we're doing that 10 times a day, if I've explained to you, I've educated you by talking to you about how I'm going to shake hands, and then I go into a room and I have to overcompensate for the fact that I'm a wheelchair user and really, really make an effort to say, oh, no, I'm not going, I don't need a coffee, because quite often I try to walk past a group of people in a networking environment. Oh, sorry, do you want to get to the coffee? No, I want to join your conversation. But they've already stopped. So it's about restarting that conversation. And so on and so forth, and making sure I'm at the right place, explaining to somebody that I partnered up with for an activity that this is how I need it to be done. It's exhausting. And so at the end of the day, we are exhausted, and then you have on top of all of that at the venue everything that we've been talking about so far, and it's not like I'll have a break and then I'll do that tomorrow. You have to do it all at the same time. Disabled people, we get exhausted all the time. I talk about it as an invisible backpack. So we have kind of almost that open suitcase of barriers that everybody knows about and we can see. But we have the invisible backpack of barriers as well that we don't talk about because we wouldn't be able to say anything else, essentially, because they take up the whole day, that people don't understand, but they kind of weather on our energy on a short-term basis, but also a long-term basis. And therefore our not just the ability, but our desire to then do it again the next day. So instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go into London 4 days in a row, I think, oh, can I actually be bothered to go through all of that again? I'm just going to miss that one. And people think like disabled people, and I'm not just disabled people. I think lots of people with lots of different experiences, they probably go through similar things. But we think about these things all the time. And so from a kind of a more diverse inclusion point of view, I think it's up to us all as society to take the responsibility to think, what else is going on for that person? How are they experiencing this? And without knowing the intricate details of everything they're experiencing, what can I do to help that person feel as though they're at the right place and that they're going to enjoy themselves when they're here, and that it's worth making all that effort for?
Yeah, I'm sure you probably find that people just see your disability without seeing the the human being. And maybe I find this sometimes that people think all I want to talk about is being trans. And they send me articles all the time on, have you seen this article about being trans? It's like, thank you. It's
Well,
like
I
it's like
know
it's
what
like
it's
a
like.
cat. It's like a cat bringing in a mouse every day, going, "Oh, look what I found you."
Yeah.
I always say, "Well, have you read it? Have you listened to it?" And they go, "No, I thought you'd be interested." Well, no, it's for you. It's not actually for me. That education,
Yeah.
I can do my own
I
research.
know.
I know who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and actually that leads on to slightly, it made me think of something else. So the other week, my friend sent me, because she knew that I would want to listen to it, my friend sent me a podcast from BBC Sounds, and it was part of You're Dead to Me, that series. And it was a podcast on disability in the Asian world. And, she knew that I wanted to listen to it, and that's why she forwarded it to me. But she said she noticed that, interestingly, it was the only podcast on that series with subtitles. And none of the other podcasts had subtitles. So there was an assumption from the BBC and the people making the subtitles that disabled people only want to listen to anything that's to do with disability, and that they would never want to listen to anything else.
Anyone who
Well,
knows you,
that's
you would
the
want to
that's
listen to
the
Robbie Williams. You want Robbie Williams. That's what you want to listen to, isn't it?
It is absolutely, yeah. I don't need subtitles for that. I know all the words off by heart. But yeah, no, absolutely. But it's again, it's kind of this assumption that as you were saying, as you rightly said, that we're categorized. Oh, this is for a transgender person. I don't need to look at it because I'm not transgender. This is for a disabled person. Therefore, we'll put this in. But this isn't for disabled people, so we won't bother with all of that stuff. It's about understanding that we're intersectional with our diversity, but we're also intersectional with our wants and desires and experiences. So, as you just said, I am a Robbie Williams fan, and that doesn't have to take away from everything else about me, or my disability doesn't have to take away from the fact that I'm a Robbie Williams fan, or whatever else is going on in my life. So it's really important to remember that it's so important to be mindful of how we can include people, but also mindful of why they're there in the first place. Are they there to feel included as a disabled person, or are they there to enjoy whatever event you're putting on?
And the other hobby you told me about is your poker playing.
Yes.
Is that So disabled people play poker. Apparently, this is like shock horror.
You know what? This is maybe a bit controversial, but I do love going into a casino and being one of the only person of any diversity in that casino. Because casinos, especially poker rooms, generally made up of men, men of all kind of makeups, but men. And so when a woman walks in, it's usually they're a partner of the man that's playing, and they sit in the corner. I watch women sitting in the corners playing on their phones, and I think, well, why don't you go and do something else? Or why don't you join in? Never ever have I seen a wheelchair user. So it's brilliant because it spooks out the other players. And so it gives me an advantage.
Because Victoria Cora Mitchell is a well-known millionaire poker player, isn't she? And you're right. I've spent a lot of time in casinos in my youth, probably too much actually. And it was very much of an ilk at the 2 o'clock. I'm not saying everybody's money laundering, but there seems to be a lot of restaurant money going through the tables at certain points of the evening. So you can always tell there's a certain community there, and it's very few women, very few. Virtually nobody with a disability that I've ever remembered. The tables are too close together, they're too crowded. The steps down into the place, very seedy establishment. So yeah, why not? If you, but again, it's stereotypes, isn't it? People imagine that your life is so unfulfilling. How could you have time for a hobby? Haven't you got? Isn't being having a disability a full-time job.
And a hobby that actually, because obviously, to play in casinos, you have to have a certain amount of money, don't you? So a hobby that actually means that you're financially, or for argument's sake, in this case, you're financially stable. I know you can argue that you're not very stable financially if you're a gambler, but that's not always the case. We see billionaire gamblers. To kind of be in that with that perception that actually also we have a spending power. But as I said, I do use that to my advantage, which is quite good. But then when they realise that I know what I'm doing, they stop thinking, they almost forget that I'm disabled and think, oh shit, I need to, oh sorry, to swearing a podcast. Oh no, I really need to watch out for this person. Or sometimes I do rubbishly and I think, oh, Essie, you've let the whole side down. So there's a bit of both there.
Yeah, my game was mainly blackjack, and I love playing the last one or two boxes on blackjack, and there's an immense responsibility because you get the last cards before the dealer, so you can almost if you take a 10 and the dealer's got a 3. Everyone looks at you going, that was the dealer's 10. You just stop the dealer going bust there. It's like, oops, sorry, my bad. I let the dealer get blackjack. Sorry, my fault.
So I'd love to have another podcast specifically on blackjack with you, because I always wonder whether it's better to sit the next, on the side just before the dealer or just after the dealer. So that's for another podcast.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know your opinion.
Well, I was like that last box because then nobody else can interfere with any cards between you and the dealer. Because if you have the first box, you could have five other people in your way.
Yeah. And it's more of I will remember that for next time. Not that I'm always.
Yeah. Well, that way you play the dealer. You're not playing with everybody else and the dealer.
And that's how everybody's got rid of those awful cards and they've gone bust, and you've still got an opportunity.
Yeah, but there's like 6 decks in a shoe, isn't there? So it's not like, and you go on this sort of probability bias. You think, well, there's been 4 10s already. There can't be another one. But that's gambler's fallacy. Of course, there's going to be another one. It's just, if it's random, it's random. And
and the house always wins. Yeah. I used to have a PA who was a croupier before she worked for me, in Star City in Australia, and she told me that because we used to go and play occasionally. I will also stress occasionally we used to go and play, and she would, if you sat down at the blackjack table, people would immediately get up, and she'd say that's because we sat down and we disrupted the play, which I also thought was so interesting. So she said, blackjack etiquette is to ask permission. Do you mind if I sit down here before sitting down?
Yeah. I always say, is this box free? Can I sit here? Is that okay?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Maybe we should start a spin-off podcast on gambling etiquette and best behavior, best practice.
Intersectional poker.
Intersectional poker. Yes. Yeah.
Well, how about we just have a night out and go to a casino and just have a bit of a laugh one night? That sounds like a good idea as well, doesn't it?
Definitely up for any time. I'm up for that. Yes. I like the tournaments because then you only lose obviously win a certain amount, because you play your certain amount and then you play till you're done. And if you're doing well, it'll keep you there for 5 hours or so. So
yeah. Yeah, it can go good, it can go bad. I used to start with £50 and that was it. And sometimes I come out with a lot, and sometimes I come out with my bus fare.
So, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So the government has there's a lot of publicity around this national disability strategy, because when we look at investment in minority characteristics or marginalised communities, disability has consistently been underinvested, not just in government, but in organisations. So this national disability strategy that the government launched, was it back in September-ish or something like that? What happened? It was a launch, and then I've heard nothing more about it since. Is it a damp script?
I haven't. I've been looking up for the updates. I've been kind of reading, looking out for the articles, and there's nothing. I think, without getting too political, I think that this is very you can't even blame this specific government, but it's very indicative of governments and disability, really, or governments and anything that's not within what they want it to be. That actually will put that out. It'll shut people up for a few months, and then they'll forget about it. But actually, we're at a stage now that we're not going to forget about it. This disability strategy, from the minute it was released, did not have any kind of, there was nothing as substantial in there to say how the change was going to happen, or even understanding of what the barriers were. I think they interviewed a maximum of 16 disabled people. I mean, representing the entire population of the UK, 16 experiences for disabled people. And all of the disability charities, or most of the disability charities that they talked to, were not, they weren't user-led organizations or disabled people's organizations. So run by, people that know best about disability, i.e. disabled people. So from the very beginning, the strategy was set to fail. And, there is an argument, and like I said, not getting too political, but there's an argument, is that deliberate? Is that a strategic move so we can say we've done something, but then don't have to actually do something? And what it does, Joe, is it further influences, it further embeds to society that, disabled people are not as important as blah, blah, blah. And it embeds kind of the feeling that the disability comes low in quotes, oppression Olympics. Because actually, even if the government aren't doing anything substantial, obviously it's not that bad. Obviously, disabled people are just complaining they could do more if they wanted to, but they just don't want to. And all last year, all in 2020, when we were locked down and when the government was meant to be strategizing to make sure that we all had what we need, disabled people were completely ignored from any kind of strategy or support that was going on, whether it was, how disabled people are going to be treated if they're exempt from wearing masks, to social care.
Do you think that
we started on a rant? Apologies.
No. I see if I can keep the rant going a bit longer.
Oh.
So you've got things like the Invictus Games, you've got Help for Heroes, which in one breath, and even we've got the Paralympics, but in one breath, that looks as though it's raising the profile of people with disabilities, disabled people. But it's only raising the profile of certain parts of disability, isn't it? They're more like the affluent part of disability, or the sponsored part of disability, where people, you might argue that if they're taking part in these events, they are fairly privileged compared with many people with a lived experience who are maybe born with a disability or acquired disabilities earlier in life, that don't have kind of Navy pensions or Army pensions to fall back on, or support of organisations. So it's creating a very two-tiered disability sort of club, isn't it?
Well, I think, I do think so. And I do, definitely. I heard something years ago where somebody said to me, literally, I don't know why disabled people don't get on with more. I mean, you see these ex-army people that do everything they want. And I just responded, well, they've got millions of pounds to do it on. Where are millions of pounds? And then we'll do everything that we want as well. And actually, again, that's an assumption that people are doing exactly what they want. And I think you're absolutely right. So I'm not going to repeat what you just said, but also not everybody wants to be sporty. So even if we do have the opportunity, we don't necessarily want to be there. So you're right. It creates a very linear kind of view of disability, because it's a certain type of person with certain types of advantages that go in for those games, but also certain personality types. Because we don't always want to be sporty. And I remember the 2012 Paralympics, people were saying afterwards, disabled people are so lazy because look at the Paralympics. And it's like, well, actually, it's where can I start? The isolation is not laziness. Isolation comes from lack of opportunities, lack of provision in order to do something else. So if you don't physically if you need one, if you don't physically have a personal assistant to help you get dressed in the morning, how do you get out of your house? if you're not physically going to be engaged in the interview process when you apply for a job, even if you can get over those barriers of applying for the first place, then you don't have the money to go out and engage in the things that you want to engage in, and so on and so forth. I think games, and actually the Paralympics was kind of created by disabled people in the disability movement. The games are brilliant, but you're right, it gives a very linear view of what disability is, and also kind of that excitement around the games lasts as long as the games do, and then it disappears again.
Yeah, I think the other thing I've seen on the news recently that I felt really, really positive about was the support for people with Down syndrome, how they're now providing lifelong guaranteed support and care and financial support. I mean, it meant a lot to me because one of my best friends, their son has Downs, and their son was born at around the same time as our daughter. And so I've grown up in a world where my daughter, my son, one of their best friends has Downs, and we went camping and we've done stuff. So we've known Daniel for many years. And I was even though I was never really aware that the life expectancy of someone with Downs used to be around teenage. So many Downs people didn't outlive their parents. And I remember talking to my friend about this, and one of their long-term concerns is what happens when they are not able to look after their son Dan. He still has needs. He's not independent, couldn't cook for himself. He's certainly not independent. He does work. He's got jobs and he's very proud of that. He's got a girlfriend, etc. But they were really worried about what his future would hold. And it wasn't until the announcement on the news a couple of weeks ago that I really appreciated the fact that the life expectancy of someone with Downs now is in their 60s or 70s or even older. I mean, there's no kind of life limit now. So yeah, these are the things we've got to start looking at as a society. We've got aging population. My parents are in their 80s. My father-in-law and mother-in-law in their 80s now. My mother-in-law is very infirm, hardly walks. My father can hardly walk either. Even a 2-inch step is a big challenge for my dad now. So yeah, you get into your my age, late 50s, you suddenly start realizing it's not just around disability in terms of at birth or acquired, car crash, whatever it may be. There's also infirmness through age. And we are growing a population now who are going to be more and more infirm later in life. And we've got to start investing and putting support in place. Because I'm now thinking, actually, that's me as well. That's me in 10, 15 years' time. I can't be selfish. I've got to think about, why wasn't I thinking about this 40 years ago when I started doing my pension? I should have been thinking about not only my pension, but also the social environment that I want to grow up in. And I think that's where we're starting to get to now. We're starting to realize that we can't just keep ignoring this.
But I think I do agree with you. There were 2 points in there that I want to raise. You can't ignore it, just so that you can remind me in a second when I will inevitably forget. So the first point is, it's going to happen to all of us. But then a point that you made before was that, the government have kind of embedded all these things so that people with Down syndrome are supported forever, essentially. But we can't just leave it there. We can't forget that, what goes into creating good, meaningful support for people. So it's not about, what I worry about these things is it means that we create these day centres or these homes and stick people in them and then say, oh, we're supporting them. But that's not what support is. It's making sure that people with Down syndrome are collaborating or co-producing their own support, and actually the people delivering that support understand how important that is for people to live the life that they want to, not the one that's handed to them. And also the other point that you made about, it's going to happen to all of us, that you're not wrong, you're absolutely correct. But I don't think it's good enough for people to think about that, because first of all, it means that they only have to start thinking about it for their future, not for their now. We need to be we need to be in, but we're not in, and we need to be striving all the time for a society that's equal because we're human beings, not equal because we're going to get there eventually, equal because we want to live in a world where everybody has equal, but like actual equal opportunities, and we know that we create equitable opportunities in order for the experience to be equal for everybody. So that's what I mean by equal opportunities. Um, yeah, we can't just say, oh, it'll happen to me one day, therefore I should look out for it. We have to say, well, there's lots of people that are not in such a privileged position as I am. This isn't good enough. We need to be moving to a world where everybody has the same advantages.
I completely agree with what you're saying. I think human nature is you tend to see things that are in front of you or around you. If you're not touched by disability in any way, then why is it relevant to you? Privilege says it's not my concern. Privilege says I've got other things and I haven't got it easy either, is what privilege says.
Yeah.
It's only when your privilege bubble gets a bit burst or distorted one day that you go, aha, now I get it. So that's kind of the reality of human nature. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying we should use that as an excuse.
It's but I'm sure your listeners are the type of people that do it because we're human beings and we all deserve to be treated equally, whatever that means for us. And so we have the opportunity, all of us have the opportunity to influence out.
Yeah, and that's definitely the challenge. We've got to keep the momentum up, keep the stories up, keep hearing and listening. And you're right. We can't just wait until we're in our 50s and go, oh, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it,
yeah. But also, you're right, hearing and listening, but also doing.
Yeah, we've got to start hearing the stories. We've got to, we're talking more about, it's not more about dementia support now. People are more focused on that. Again, because we're living longer and we're healthier longer, it's almost like a Duracell battery. We go on and on and on until suddenly we stop. And the cliff edge is a lot more defined now, whereas maybe in the past we drifted into old age and things got gradually worse. Now our body is kept alive. We have hip replacements. We can do more until suddenly maybe our brain gives in, our heart gives in, or something else gives in. And it all kind of crashes together. So dementia, Parkinson's, hearing, sight, arthritis, joints, etc. So everything starts to come together at that point in life where we become disabled. Really, we go back to our 2-year-old self, where we can't do anything for ourselves anymore. We have to be fed. We have to be looked after, and I think we as a society have to create environments where people can have an expectation of, well, a quality of life. And you say not just being stuck in a home, but actually something that is challenging. You can still play poker. You can still listen to Robbie Williams. You're not sat in a bed all day, waiting for someone to come and feed you or change you or turn you. And that's your only activity. And I think that's the reality for a lot of people still, isn't it?
I think so. And we need to be moving towards a world where kind of the, 5th generation coming of disabled people say, oh my God, what, you couldn't get on a bus easily? Do you know what I mean? So that it's so new to them that it's shocking. A bit like, what is a telephone box?
See, I know your passion is completely around disability, and that's your focus. You also understand the intersectionality of it, and you're doing some work with another organisation as well, aren't you?
Yeah. So I'm a trustee of a charity called Parapride, which is an LGBTQ plus disability charity. So it's where the intersectionality of the two meet. Because there's again getting into misconceptions about inclusion and accessibility. There's a massive misconception that disabled people are disabled and therefore they don't have relationships. And so this charity was brought about to recognise that disabled people are more than their impairment, but actually they want relationships. They want to be loved and love outwards as well. And that could mean lots of different things for lots of different people. And so what Parapride specifically strive towards is educating and influencing venues to be accessible for disabled people. So LGBTQ plus venues to be accessible and inclusive for disabled people by empowering, showing people what is possible, then supporting people to know how to get there. Because
people are kind of
historically,
shocked sometimes, aren't
the reasons historically, LGBTQ plus venues are not accessible, because the venues had to be grabbed where they were, and now we're in 2021, and they're still not very accessible. So it's about changing that.
Yeah, I've heard people remark on the fact that a wheelchair user is having a family, a wheelchair user has relationships, a wheelchair user has sex. How does that work? And then suddenly, how can someone who is blind or deaf or has an impairment in some other way, how can they be gay as well? It's kind of, haven't they got enough on their plate to worry about without being gay and disabled?
Yeah.
It's like this sort of shock horror, and it's like, hang on a minute. You're not seeing into the soul and the heart of the person. You're looking at the skin and the shell.
Yeah.
And they think, whoever you're talking about, they think in the same way as you do. They think in the same way as I do.
Yeah.
They love, they laugh, they cry, and they feel all the same emotions. And the disability is just the shell of how they interact with society. And some people are still amazed that you play poker, and it's kind of, how does that? It's so crazy.
I kind of think maybe that's not just to do with disability, though. That might also be to do with being a woman.
Right. Yes.
That people think, oh, a woman playing poker, and I also think it's kind of an out of the blue hobby. It's not a hobby that many people do, is it? So I do think it is to do with my disability, but also my other intersectional characteristics or identities come into that a lot as well.
I think, I'm not going to be patronising. I think it's important for everyone to be an ally to someone, or to another group, or to another community, because I could spend all my time being transgender, being in the LGBT community, but I feel that I've got some energy to be an advocate, an ally for other people, and outside of my own, outside of my own self, if you like, but also recognizing that we're all intersectional. We all have something about us. There's always more to us than that. And disability, I think you've always said in the past, people with disability come from all walks of life and all backgrounds and all futures, if you like. So it's really, really important to think about how we can bring that together. And when you first told me you were involved with Para Pride, I envisaged people jumping out of aircraft with parachutes on, sort of gay Marines or something.
I agree. The name Para Pride, so the para comes from paraplegic, obviously.
Yes, I get that.
Pride comes from being proud. But absolutely, yeah. No, sometimes it does take. And I agree with you. I think that we do need to, that actually, if we want to continue striving towards equality, we need to step up outside our own world and think about how we can support each other's by being allies. And I'm a really strong promoter of the fact that an ally doesn't have to be a formal position. So you don't need to write down somewhere that you're an ally. An ally is just about your behaviour and your compassion and empathy for another person.
I completely agree, and I also think it's not something you should award yourself. It's not a medal or a badge you're trying to collect. It's something that through words, deeds, and actions that people award you. I think I'm very, very passionate about that.
So true, yeah, so true. Yeah.
We've been nattering away now, actually, for a couple of hours. We had an hour in the green room before we started, so we've been talking all morning, and I could talk to you forever. And in fact, I'm looking forward to getting together for another steak dinner somewhere, or a game of poker in the near future when we can meet up.
Let's do it. Let's go to the Empire in London. We can have steak and poker, two for a price of one. Probably
Brilliant.
Not for the price of one, to be fair. In a casino, it will definitely be the price of two. But yeah, no, let's do it.
Right, that's definitely a date when we can get up there. Maybe in the new year.
Yeah, no,
brilliant.
Sounds good.
So, how can people get hold of you? Was your web address? What's the best way of contacting you?
So, I am on LinkedIn under SE Hardy. which is my name, and I have a website as well, which is celebratingdisability.co.uk, where it has all my contact details. I'd love to get in touch.
And Essie, you spell ESI.
Yeah,
for
E
those
for
who,
Echo, S for Sierra, I for India.
and it rhymes with messy Essie.
Yes, it rhymes with messy.
Fantastic.
That's what my
Thank you
uncle
so
used
much.
to call me when I was young. He called me Messy Essie.
Well, I'm sure that you're quite a cute little kid at the time.
Couldn't possibly say.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in, for listening in this far. Please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, share this episode with them. I have a number of other exciting guests lined up over the next few weeks and months, and I'm sure you'll be equally as inspired by them as well. And also, remember, if you'd like to be a guest or you have any improvements on how we can improve this show and future episodes, then please do send me an email. I welcome your feedback and suggestions to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. And finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Look forward to catching you next time. Bye.